I started in show business at the top, and I've been working my way down ever since. It was in the latter days of the Jack Benny radio program on CBS, and I got an audition because I had been taking piano lessons since the age of 4. And my piano teacher had a daughter who was an actress. And at some point, she decided, possibly after trying to teach me, to abandon the career of piano teacher and to become a children's agent instead. And so she said to my parents, and probably to the parents of every other kid she knew, mind if I try to get some work for them? I said, sure. And my parents were both European immigrants and didn't know much about how any of this worked. It just seemed like a joke. We didn't hear from her for 6 or 7 months, and then all of a sudden, a call comes in one day, audition at the Jack Benny show. The Taft building at the corner of Hollywood and Vine was where their offices were. Jack Benny's brother-in-law, Hilliard Marks, was the producer of the show. Family is important in show business. And I went in, and I was a very good reader. I'd had, by that point, I probably was in my 2nd or 3rd year of this private school I was going to for the first 3 grades before I transferred to public school. So I was really good at cold reading, and so I got the job thanks to that.
And you became a member of a group known as the Beverly Hills Beavers.
These were simpler times. Yes, this was the kind of the Cub Scoutish group that Jack Benny squired from time to time. And I also played him as a kid a few times, but I worked for him for 8 years, radio and TV.
Even at the tender age of 7, in what was still relatively in the infancy of television, it wasn't all quite smooth. You had an encounter with, was it Red Skelton?
Yeah. I loved working with for Jack Benny. He was incredibly generous and kind, and in every way. He loved the fact that people around him got laughs, because he knew he could always get the laugh of reaction off of that. Red Skelton was a different story. He had an hour-long live comedy show on CBS from Television City on Wednesday night, and I had a part in 1 week, and rehearsal went fine, dress rehearsal went fine, scripted show, of course, live TV, and we get to my scene on the air, and he starts ad-libbing on me.
And you're how old at the time?
I'm a 9-year-old kid at the time. And he's ad-libbing. And it's my job to find the way back into the script from wherever he's wandered off. So, you know, it's a miracle that there's any of the child visible on TV, you know, not just a big ball of sweat standing there, because this is not a thing you do, really, to a kid. So he knew that, somebody told him that after the show. And he comes over to me right after the show, and he's kneeling down in front of me. He says, "Hi." He doesn't apologize, but he says, "I want you to have this." And he hands me his son Richard's St. Christopher's medal. So he fucks 2 kids that night.
But an early baptism of fire in the world of show business.
Yeah.
No, I mean, but apart from comedy, which obviously a lot of people know you've primarily for now, you also starred in The Robe with Richard Burton and Gene Simmons.
I appeared in The Robe.
You starred,
yes.
yeah.
Yes.
I mean, what was it like being a kid on the set of these classic Hollywood movies? Because The Egyptian with Victor Mature, Peter Ustinov.
Yeah.
I mean, do you remember working with any of these people?
I remember The Robe because that was a fairly extended gig. I was doing scenes with the director's son, director Henry Koster, and his son came down with the flu or something. So I'd get called every day to come in, and was there for a much longer time than I actually worked. So I remember coming in every day. I had to get my body makeup and get my hair curled, and then sit around reading Variety, you know, until the teacher came. And then the Fox commissary in those days was really great. So that's where I got introduced to, at lunchtime, my mom would come and have lunch with me, and I got introduced to roast duck at the Fox lot. So I remember The Robe as mainly a feast of roast duck.
But I mean, we're going to move forward fairly quickly, but the one last thing I want to bring up as your childhood acting thing is, but for a decision made by your family, you could have been in Leave It to Beaver. Well, you were in Leave It to Beaver.
I was in the pilot, yeah. I was going to public school, and again, my parents were, you know, anything but show business parents. They were, this was like the most bizarre thing to them. So they wanted me to stay in public school, and they said, you know, if you do this show, we're gonna have to pull you out of, God help us, LA High, and put you in Hollywood professional school, and, you know, be surrounded by these other kid actors, and we just don't think that's the way we want you to be growing up. So, yeah.
And that was it. You were in the pilot. You could have been in the main show, but
Could have been a contender. Could have been Eddie Haskell, ladies and gentlemen. But yeah.
Did you ever have any regrets about that later? When
No.
it became-
No. I mean, because you'd hear stories about what happened to him, and none of them were really very, very hopeful or inspiring. So, you know, it seemed like a good decision on their part.
All right. So what you've stopped child acting now. You're going to public school. We'll fast forward a little bit because you went to UCLA at the ripe old age of 15 and a half?
15 and a half, yeah. I minored in Russian. Political science was the major that needed the least number of units in the major, so I took that so I could, you know, not screw around, but really take a lot of different things.
But did you have in the back of your mind that you would go back into show business?
Never.
Was that always? No?
Never. No. Thought I might be a teacher or a journalist or go into government work of some kind. That's why I took Russian, because I thought, you know, that's going to be big. And it's coming back.
But you did some, I think I'm right in saying you also flirted with the advertising industry at one point, didn't
For
you?
2 summers, I went to work at Y&R, Young and Rubicam in New York. Yeah, I guess that was a flirtation. It was basically a way to get to New York. They had advertised this is how long ago this was. These were internships where you got paid. And I actually wrote, you know, advertising and stuff. And it was lovely and fine, but I just thought, great. I now know what that's like. I don't have to ever do that again.
All right. So at what point did you decide broadcasting? Because it was radio first, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, I was, in fact, doing everything that I thought I might want to do. I'd gone and worked at the state legislature in Sacramento for a year. I taught school for a couple of years. I did journalism. And in the meantime, friends of mine were opening a movie and rock venue. It sounds strange, but it's now the Nickelodeon Theater across the street from the Palladium on Sunset. And it was called the Kaleidoscope. And I was doing radio advertising for them. And the guy at the radio station, they couldn't afford the #1 rated station in town, so we took the #2 rated rock station. And the guy that I was buying ad time from said, you know, there's this show we're doing that's making fun of the news. You might be interested in it. And I sent in a tape. Actually, I brought in a tape, drove home, and by the time I got home, the message was on my answering machine, would you like to come to work tomorrow?
And so what did that entail?
We did 3 10-minute shows a day, which were combination of newscasts and satirical sketches and songs. So there'd be some news, and then off of one of the news stories, bang, you're into a sketch about that situation. It's called The Credibility Gap. And thank you. And yeah, and it was amazing. You know, 3 shows a day. It was like the best experience. Just crank it out, forget about that one, get on to the next one. You know, keep going.
But who else did the Credibility Gap with?
Oh, so the next guy in after me was David L. Lander, a remarkably funny guy. He got the job because he was working at, this is how long ago this was, there was actually an answering service with live people taking messages.
Really?
And a woman who worked with us said, there's this guy who takes my messages and he's very funny, you should try him. And so David came in, and David said, oh, I have this friend that I went to school with in New York, McKean, you should get him, Michael McKean. And so, and a lot of other people came in and played with us from time to time, but that was and then there was one of the newsmen stayed with us for a long time. His name was Richard Beebe, who's passed away, but very funny guy as well. And
I'm just going to be stating David Lander is probably best known to the television audience as Squiggy from Laverne and Shirley, the TV show, Gary Marshall's TV show. And he's done a lot of other things in his career as well.
Yes.
But so how do you translate sketches on radio into a career in television? Because, I mean, it's a good time to mention David Lander, because one of your first writing jobs on television, I think I'm right in saying, was on Laverne and Shirley, wasn't it?
Yes. When the credibility gap was sort of raided by Gary Marshall for Michael and David, they said, well, come along and we'll write our scenes together. And so I was there for the first 13 weeks. And that was a really remarkable experience, because I don't know if this didn't appear in any of the recent obits for Gary, but the only show ever to debut, to premiere at #1 was Laverne and Shirley.
Seriously?
Yeah. A spin-off of Happy Days. So week 3, David and Michael and I find ourselves in the office of Michael Eisner, who was then running Paramount, who has...
Whatever happened to him?
Yeah, I don't know. You can see him, he's wearing a goofy suit at one of the parks. And they clearly had thought that they had, reached the magic vein of spin-offs. And the spin-off of Happy Days went #1. Let's get a spin-off of Laverne and Shirley. That's got to be gold. So it was just craziness going on. So by week 5, they're doing Laverne and Shirley, and we're shooting a presentation, thank God, not a proper pilot, so it will never be seen. It has never been seen. It will never be seen. Because we thought, well, where can we put these characters where we can have fun? And David and I probably Michael too, had been huge fans of the Bilko show, so we said, well, let's put him in the Army. So that was the pilot.
And it never went, obviously.
No. A dear friend of mine worked at Paramount for years and tried to find it.
Yeah. Disappeared.
Ain't there no more.
So where do you go from there? What's your next thing? You're sitting there, you're on what is at the time the most successful sitcom, but obviously it wasn't really your cup of tea.
Yeah, I'd walk away, I'd leave the Paramount lot every day thinking, okay, 200 people working on this show are acting as if this is funny. There's something wrong with me. So I bailed after 13 weeks, and Norman Lear had done this series called Mary Hartman, and he was spinning off a series featuring a character that Martin Mull had done in that show, or actually the twin brother of the character, played by Martin, Fernwood Tonight, which was a faux TV talk show. And somehow Martin reached out, even before we used to say reach out, to me to say, offer me a writing job on that show. So I wrote with Martin his opening monologues for Fernwood Tonight and the successor show America Tonight. So that's
and that was Martin and Fred. Is
and
that where you met Fred Willard?
Well, I met Fred Willard earlier. The Credibility Gap had toured with the Ace Trucking Company. And so I got to watch Freddie every night and just be in awe of him, how amazing and inexplicable that is. And then I'd watch him at Fernwood and take scripts that, I realized Freddie is an incredible improviser, but he approaches this stuff mainly as an actor. And I was, at the time at least, approaching the stuff with a writer's head. So if I were handed a script with something not funny, I'd say, well, but this is not good. And Fred would just find a way to make it funny. Day after day, I'd just watch him turn dross into gold right in front of my eyes. It was really remarkable. Some very funny stuff. I got my dog on the show a couple times. Well, I had a great studio dog, Bob, and he'd come to the studio with me. And the amazing thing about that show is it was a great collection of very extremely funny people. The great Kenny Mars from a lot of the Mel Brooks movies was a regular on that show, and just insanely funny. He was improvising, and just it was nothing like what he was doing. And all this was on a show produced by Alan Thicke. Norman had hired Alan to produce this show. And so there were some arguments.
But I mean, obviously, much more your cup of tea than rather than the standard American sitcom of
Yeah,
Laverne and Shirley and what have you.
And Martin was great. Martin was a wonderful person to work with. You know, it became. He had been at Warner Brothers Records when the Credibility Gap had been on Warner Brothers Records, but he was more successful there than we were. And but it was when I got to Fernwood and I worked with him closely that I realized show business for Martin was different than it was for me. Show business was a way for him to support his art, which was painting. And so, you know, he had a slightly different attitude towards things than I did.
I missed one thing that I wanted to actually come back to because it led to one of your best known roles, the TV show you did with a great group of people.
Yeah.
And it led to, of course, I'll let you tell the story.
Yeah, well, Rob Reiner and David Lander particularly were social buddies, and Rob was also a longtime friend of a guy who was a friend of mine at the time, Albert Brooks. So we were all kind of hanging around. And off of, after All in the Family ended, Rob did a couple of TV projects, and he got a deal for a pilot at ABC to do a show which was a spoof of television called The TV Show. And he had a script written, and it wasn't very good, and he called me in to produce and to kind of supervise the rewrite. And so I had just seen Christopher Guest and his then partner Tom Leopold, a very incredibly funny writer. They did these two sketch pilots called Flakes and Fruits and Vegetables, and they were incomparably funny together. They just had this brilliant chemistry. And I, just having had my comedy group fall apart because they went off to do Laverne and Shirley, just saw this chemistry that I missed now, and I just said to Rob, let's bring them in to work on the rewrite and be in the cast. So we all wrote the rewritten version. The premise was really simple. The first shot is behind a guy in a Barca-lounger who's got, you know, chips and beer or soft drink and a remote, and he's clicking through channels on the TV. And then from then on, you're watching what he's watching. And which was, I don't know if we realized what a great idea it was, because the trouble with sketch shows is so often endings. And so you got a great 3-minute sketch and a terrible ending. You just switch the remote before you get to the ending. And so we could do, you know, long pieces, we could do little short pieces. Chris did like a 10-second thing with a black and white Mexican ventriloquist bit just to do it. We did the trial of Adolf Hitler, you know, TV dramas that never, you know, of events that never happened. Marty Mull was in it, Billy Crystal was in that show, and Spinal Tap made its first appearance in a Takeoff on Midnight Special with Rob playing Wolfman Jack.
And so at what point did you all sit there and say, that's something we've got to do more with? I mean, how did...
When we were filming the Spinal Tap song, which was called Rock and Roll Nightmare, it ended with like a camera up there. We were on the floor doing kind of Busby Berkeley moves, improbably for a heavy rock band. And there was supposed to be smoke, but instead it was coming down as just drops of hot oil. And since we were advised that it's illegal to kill prop men in California, we just mused about what else we could do with these characters. And so when I came back from Saturday Night Live, we all got together and said, let's try to do something with these guys. We originally thought of doing a movie about roadies. We just wanted to do a movie about rock and roll because we were all frustrated that movies kept getting rock and roll wrong. And it just seemed so easy to get it right. So we thought about doing a movie about roadies, and then we saw a movie called Roadie, and that disabused us of that idea. So we went back to the band and centering it on the band, and we made a 20-minute demo of it because we started to write it, and then we thought nobody's going to be able to understand this script. It just, you know, it would not be an effective sales piece. So let's just make a demo as a sales piece. Went in and showed it to all these guys who ran studios, and they just went, "What was that?"
How difficult was it to pitch?
Every studio in town turned it down. We would not have gotten to make it had not Norman Lear had a brief little foray as head of a studioette called Embassy, and he greenlit it. Otherwise, it would never have been made. And then he left Embassy, and we were left to the tender mercies of Jerry Perenchio, former fight promoter, now runs Univision. And yeah, and he made it clear that if the first two critics who saw the movie didn't like it, it wouldn't come out.
Really?
Oh yeah, I mean, it was just total fluke after fluke after fluke that movie got made and got out and got liked.
But to an element, even with that kind of threat hanging over you, it must have been something of a dream come true for you, because you've always played music, you like music. Christopher, I know, and Michael McKean both played. So you were writing your song, you were getting to write songs, play music,
yes, yes,
and do a bit of acting and be satirical.
Yes. No, I mean, it was huge fun, but it was very, very, very hard work to get to that fun, and then to get that fun out to people. But the 25 days that we did it was just like absolutely tremendous fun. And, you know, we're working with all these great people, Fran Drescher, Billy, Dana Carvey, Fred Willard again, Howard Hessman. I mean, it was just a great collection of people, I think.
And how much of it was actually scripted, and how much did you improvise?
2 lines were scripted.
2 lines?
Yeah, the speech for Patrick McNee. He was not an improviser. You know, Chris, Michael, and I were not improvisers by trade. We'd never gone to, you know, been part of an improv group, the Credibility Gap. We wrote all our sketches. We did not set out to make an improvisational movie. We set out to make a movie that looked as if it were a real documentary, and the only way to do that, we thought, was to do it improvisationally. It was a means to an end. It wasn't the end.
You had 2 stints at Saturday Night Live.
Yeah, that's how dumb I was.
Ups and downs? Mixed?
Downs.
Mixed? Downs?
Downs.
All downs?
Yeah, but the ups were the leaving. You know, I mean, there was an up, you know, when we got to do the synchronized swimming piece. Marty and I,
sure.
Yeah, and Chris. And did a couple other things that were fun. I did a piece with Paul Schaefer, which was just, Paul, I think, has never yet really shown people exactly how funny he is, you know. So we wrote a piece together, which was a backers. B. Arthur was the guest host that week, and and we were amused by the idea of backers auditions and especially for like rock musicals. Mm-hmm. So it was a backers audition for a show called Two Men about Charles Manson and Jay Sebring. Jay Sebring was one of the people that was killed in the Manson murders, and it was very dark, obviously, but. We figured it out that we had a good shot at getting it on the air. You know, you start thinking very politically at that show. How do you get a sketch through this machine? Give it a cute name. Give everybody in the cast parts. You know, things like that. So everybody had a songlet, and it went on, and. It never was rerun, but after.
But it made it onto the air.
Made it onto air, and after in the party afterwards, Lauren said to me of a sequence near the end that I was in. That was the moment you became a star. And I wasn't on the air for the next 3 weeks.
I don't think people understand. It's quite a competitive setup there, isn't it? You have to compete to get your sketches on the air.
Well, you know, competition would be good, but competing for the favors of a psychopath is a different thing altogether. The first words he says to me are, "I've never hired a male Jew for the company before. I've mainly gone for the Chicago Catholic thing."
But isn't he Jewish?
Yes, sir. Now, I knew I was in for an interesting ride.
But you went back.
I went back because he wasn't there.
Ah, and was that a more pleasurable experience?
No. No, I went back. Chris and Michael and I had Spinal Tap had been a musical guest that year because the movie had come out, and we went on in April and did Christmas with the Devil, and we were treated well. And I thought, hey, it's all changed. And I realized when I got there again, no, it's different when you're the musical guest than when you're in the actual cast. So I was told, you know, we know that the other people in the cast don't really care that much about politics, so we're going to really look to you for the political stuff. And it was like 3 or 4 weeks. I wrote a Reagan sketch, and the last time I actually got into makeup and walked around in Reagan makeup until about 12:53 when the floor manager said, the Reagan sketch is not running tonight. And I thought, he doesn't think I can tell time to tell me now. But, you know, yeah, it was like that.
They would actually leave it till the show was on the air before telling you your sketch wasn't in the show?
That one time, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
We talked about Spinal Tap and the problems when you started making it, but you've gone back and collaborated with that group of people a number of times in some fantastic films. You know, For Your Consideration, A Mighty Wind. I mean, is it like getting back together with a group of friends when you do something like that?
Yeah, except that it's scary. I thought it was just me, you know, being scared to go into another improvisational film. But I was always joining late. I would come in somewhere during the process. My part would be scheduled. But in For Your Consideration, I was there from day one. So I'm there when everybody else is in the makeup room saying, well, this time, I'm getting the teeth this time. I'm getting the funny teeth. Well, I'm getting the mustache. Well, I'm going to do the hair. And I heard Catherine O'Hara, who, you know, I regard as a comedy goddess, saying, I can't believe I'm going to put myself through this shit again. And I realized it's not just me. Everybody
Really?
is like scared shitless about it because it is, you know, you're going out there. Chris is great. I think the reason that these movies work and other attempts to do improvised movies don't necessarily work as well is that Chris is never eager for the laugh. He just wants you to tell the story of the scene. He knows that with funny people, there'll be plenty of what he needs, but he's never like, you know, thinking, where's the, come on, do a thing, wait a minute. So you're not pushing to score. You're just doing what an actor is supposed to do, which is telling the story of the scene, except you have to come up with the, you know, he's only given me one piece of real directing ever, which was in For Your Consideration. I don't know if you've seen it, but I play a sort of a guy who aspires to be a B-level actor, and he's being interviewed by somebody from Entertainment Tonight for some reason, and the person who's interviewing him is played by Fred Willard, and we're on the Ince, now it's called the Ince Studios lot in Culver City, and we're folding chairs out, not on a stage, but out on the lot itself in one of the roadways in the lot. And so Fred's getting into his chair. Chris walks over to me, puts his arm around my shoulder and says 3 words of advice to me. Don't even try.
Seriously?
Well, it's because Fred is going to roll over you, you know. You're in with the comedy steamroller, you know. Don't even try.
I mean, just quickly though, how much of a storyline do you get given when you're doing one of those? Do they give you...
Every scene is broken down. You know, it's broken down every scene, because it has to be, you know. The crew has to know what to bring and where to go.
Right.
So it's basically, the way I describe it is, it's like reading a conventional film script with all the dialogue redacted by the CIA.
Okay, moving on back to television. You got involved with a show where you did some funny voices.
Yeah.
The Simpsons.
Yeah. Oh, that's the one.
Yeah.
Yeah, Matt Groening and I had a chance meeting at the newsstand, Melrose and I think Martell or something like that, when there used to be newsstands. And he'd been a fan of my radio show, and I'd been a fan not of Life in Hell so much, but of a column he used to write for the LA Reader called Record Mix, the premise of which is he was supposed to review records every week, and the actuality of which is every week he wrote a column about why he wasn't reviewing records that week. And it was really funny. And so we had that little meeting and, said goodbye. And then a year or two later, I got a phone call from, not Matt, but I think from Sam Simon, saying that we want you to, we're doing this thing. And I thought, cartoons, I don't know. And it was about the third call, it's only an hour a week, he lied. It'd be easy, you should do it, thing. And I finally went, okay. Now there's an interesting backstory to that. I don't know if we have time for that.
Go for it.
Okay. Before that, I got called by the people who were doing preparing to do the Tracy Ullman show for Fox, which was Jim Brooks and Rhea Perlman, and Jerry Belson, I think, was involved. And they said, we want to talk to you about doing something with the show. And we're having a retreat up at Ojai. And so would you come up for the weekend? I did, okay. And I come up to Ojai Valley Inn, very nice place, and they're sitting around, tossing around concepts about what Tracy was going to do. And I'm sitting in there thinking, I really don't know why I'm here. Maybe she works in a bank. No, a bank's not funny. Maybe it's a savings and loan. I'm hearing this go by. I'm sort of compressing it. It was going by more slowly than that. And mid-Sunday afternoon, as I'm watching all this happen, they finally get around to me. So what would you like to do? We need like interstitial pieces for the show. What would you like to do? I said, well, I play characters. That's what I like to do. No, you can't do that. Tracy plays characters. Oh, okay. So, all right, so we kind of part, and then now I'm doing Viva Shave Vegas. I'm in Vegas doing pre-production, and I get a call. Would you write like a 2-minute thing for what you would do for the Tracy show, for the interstitial thing? Okay. So I sat down and wrote something. At the time, I wasn't really comfortable being myself on television. I loved being characters. That's what I wanted to do. Wrote this piece, faxed it down to them, go on to do the Schaefer show. Christmas goes by. I get this call. And it's now January, and can we meet at Rhea Perlman's house in the Hollywood Hills to discuss what you wrote? I said, sure. So I drive over to Rhea's house in the Hollywood Hills, and we all sit down, and I forget who says it. Do you have a copy of what you wrote? I said, no, I faxed it down to you guys. You're the ones with the office. I was sitting in the hotel room. Oh, well, we don't have it. I said, you know what? Let's part friends right here, okay? So the next person they called to fill that slot was Matt Groening. And then it comes around the other way.
So talking about The Simpsons, when you first went into the show, how many voices did they say they wanted you to do?
They didn't say. They just said, they never specified, or I would have made a better deal. But I, would just see scripts with characters indicated for me and a one-line description. We didn't see the drawings, so it was just purely based on a description. I made an intuitive leap. I'm not a believer in too much analysis when it comes to this stuff. Just go for it, see what happens. If it's a wrong leap, they'll tell you to change. If they don't, 27 years later.
Just out of here, do you have any idea how many voices you've done for The Simpsons?
No, I don't know. I see different numbers. There's a popular Simpsons fan site that says 23 regular characters, but more than 100 incidental and regular. Certainly over the course of 27 years.
And I mean, 27 years, we could be here all night just discussing The Simpsons, but I remember reading a little story, I don't know whether you wrote it or you told me it, about when they had Michael Jackson.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, that's, we don't usually, especially in the later 24 years, perform with the guest artists, the celebrities who come in. They're usually on their own schedule. But for some reason, this was with Michael Jackson. So the read-through was moved from 20th Century Fox to Sandy Gallen's dining room in Beverly Hills or in Bel Air. And we're all there at 7:30, about 7 o'clock for a 7:30 read-through p.m. And 7:30 comes and goes, and no Michael. And normally, a read-through is a fairly garrulous enterprise until the script is actually begun. We were all sitting there just so cowed by the nature of this event, and now nothing going on, that we're all sitting there in this very bizarre, awkward little silence that lasted 45 minutes until Michael shows up. So Michael comes and reads. Now we're at Fox for the record, and in those days there was a second read-through before we start recording. So we're all around the table in the studio in the Fox lot, and we get to this part where Michael plays a 300-pound mental patient who thinks he's Michael Jackson. And so at some point he breaks into song, special lyrics for Michael Jackson's song Ben, the song about a rat. And Michael, who's been reading his lines, sits back at that point, and a guy we had no idea who he was, sitting across the table, starts singing the song for Ben. And we're all sort of looking a little quizzical, and I lean over to Yardley Smith and I say, I think we paid enough for the speaking Michael Jackson, but not enough for the singing Michael Jackson.
Do you have, I mean, the fans obviously vote on which is their favourite character that you do. Do you have a favourite, or is there anyone that you feel particularly?
He seems sort of apropos this year, C. Montgomery Burns. He did run for governor in season 3, one of my favorite episodes. But yeah, I like pure evil. They're good fun.
And have you seen that thing that's doing the rounds on the internet just now, the prediction of Donald Trump running for president?
Oh, yeah. I don't remember that, but I guess it did happen.
And do you still have input into any of the characters, or is it all?
It's basically protective input. You get new writers coming in for whom these characters are. I don't know exactly how to describe what their attitude might be, but they start what one thinks is violating the character in some way. The most obvious example is coming in and writing jokes in which Ned Flanders toys around with the name of Jesus, for example. And I say, look, I don't care, but Ned wouldn't say that. So why don't we just not do that? And the answer is usually we'll fix it in post. But I think all the cast members feel protective about their characters. There was this one really notorious example where season 12, we'd had this fairly detailed backstory about Seymour Skinner, the school principal. He had this Vietnam history and all that. And some guy comes in and writes an episode where, no, he's not Seymour Skinner. He has a revealed secret identity as Armin Tamzarian. And I said, but you're really, the audience has invested 12 years now in this character. You're saying, kind of screw you to the audience when you do this. No, it's fine. It aired, but I don't even know if it's in the syndication package. It must be for financial reasons, but I think it's sort of, they try to discourage it airing.
And could you ever have imagined that it would last this long?
Let's just remember that when the show started, the Fox network was on UHF stations. Remember those? Your 52s, your 48s, your 63s. Many people needed to attach a coat hanger to their TV antenna connector to get the channels. Mm-hmm. A UHF TV network. And, who thought that was going to last, let alone any given show on it? I think Married with Children, and then Us, and then thanks to us, NFL football. You know, this is really the history of that network. But so no, nobody. You know, again, it's like much like Laverne and Shirley. It's like, oh, it's a little 6-week gig, you know.
And here you are, and still okay with it, still doing it, still.
Well, there was a little thing happened last year, but you know, worked out okay.
Okay, back to directing a little bit, because on a slightly more serious note, you took time out to write and produce a documentary.
Direct a documentary.
Direct a documentary.
Karen Murphy produced it. Yeah.
The Big Uneasy.
Yeah.
I mean, you have a home in New Orleans. I know it's very dear to you.
Yes.
What made you want to go and do that?
Well, living in New Orleans, one read in the local press the ongoing reports on the results of two projects based at universities, one at LSU and one at Cal Berkeley, into why the city flooded in 2005. And so we became aware that there was a kind of a big story here, a failure of engineering by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, a man-made disaster that need not have happened. It was not a humongous hurricane as it looked like in the Gulf. Actually, when it made landfall, when passed by New Orleans, it never even hit New Orleans. It was a strong Category 1 or a weak Category 2. It wasn't this fearsome Category 5 that everybody had predicted. And I, over time, had the authors of those two reports, a whistleblower from inside the Army Corps of Engineers, a couple other people who knew parts of this story on my radio show. And then I was in London in October of 2009, moving into our new little place there. There was no furniture, or minimal furniture, so my computer was sitting on a cardboard box, getting the live internet feed of President Obama making his first presidential appearance in New Orleans. And when he called it a natural disaster, my head exploded. And I just thought, okay, those radio interviews don't seem to be penetrating. What do people do to get word out? Well, all these guys are making documentaries. I know how to do film, kind of, and I know all these people, and I've had them on the radio, so they might trust me to get the story out. And 9 months from now is the 5th anniversary, which would be a good opportunity to have it come out. So I said to myself, what's your excuse for not doing it?
Which brings us back to what we started the evening of the night with, Nixon's
Yes.
the One. You gave a brief introduction at the beginning. I was staggered. I've seen all 6 of them, obviously. How did you decide, from the dozens of hundreds of hours, as you said, that you went through, how did you decide what to concentrate on? Was it a difficult task?
No, I mean, most of the tapes have never been transcribed. So the only thing there are logs of who he's talking to and what topic is discussed. My collaborator, Stanley Cutler, who was the country's leading authority on the Nixon tape, great historian at University of Wisconsin, now passed away. I talked to him, I said, you know, I'd listened recreationally to the tapes, he'd listened to them professionally. I found them grandly entertaining. I said, you know, we know that there are certain themes that recur. So let's make a list of the themes and then just go through the logs looking for conversations that touch on these themes. And then of those, pick the best representatives of. So for example, just in the stuff that we went through, there are dozens of occurrences where Henry Kissinger is saying, that was the best speech you ever gave. That was the best press conference. Oh, that was, no, nobody could ever come to it. You know. So we just needed to get the best of those, you know. We wanted ones that just were golden little pearls, or if pearls can be golden, of that obsequiousness that Kissinger practiced. So we searched. He would listen to some tapes, I'd listen to some tapes, and we'd bat it back and forth because he was in Madison and I was in New Orleans. The tapes are horribly recorded because the microphone is in a desk drawer. So when we picked the tapes, we sent them to be transcribed by John Dean's transcriber. John Dean has been writing books about this ever since, and so he has a woman who's been trained to do this stuff. So she made our transcripts. And then as we rehearsed with the cast, wonderful cast, I mean, that guy who played Kissinger is this great British actor, Henry Goodman. Wonderful, wonderful actor. And we had the tapes. We'd listened to them because I said, look, and one of the reasons I wanted to do it in England is because I knew that, two things. One, I didn't want to have the inevitable meeting that I feared over here with a very earnest network executive. Look, we know he didn't like blacks and Mexicans, but does he have to hate Jews? And second, the arguments about accuracy. The British crew got it without ever having to have it spelled out for them. It's just we're doing the Oval Office exactly the way it looked when Nixon was president, and the actors got, you know, that we've been given this great gift. It will never happen again. Let's be true to it. Let's get as close as we can to not only the words, but the nuances and the timing and the emphasis and the feelings of what's going on here. So as we do that, there'd be these spots where one or another of the actors would say, God, what's in the transcript just doesn't sound like him. And so because of my radio stuff, I'm fairly adept at sound processing, and I have some tools, and I just would put tapes through the drive to the studio was a long one from where we live in London, so I had time to put them on my laptop through several of these sound processors, and words start popping out. And it was almost like being on a sitcom where, you know, new pages are coming in, you know, during the week, because, okay, here's today's new words. And of course, when they popped out, of course they were right, you know. The transcriber did her best, and she had the most wonderful name, so you couldn't do anything about it. Her name was the answer to a trivia question, what do homeless people have for breakfast? Her name was Charity Bacon. And to just show how much they cared about getting it right, the last scene in the last episode is Nixon preparing to resign, the 8 minutes before he does his resignation speech. And so it's going to be televised. So there are TV cameras in the Oval Office. But we're shooting it, you see the style we're shooting it in, as if he hid cameras. The network that we were on in Britain, Sky, wouldn't let us imagine that he hid cameras because it wasn't true. And, you know, but that's what we wanted you to feel. So we had to find out I said, let's find out what those cameras were that were shooting him. I had a friend in Washington who was at CBS, and he found out, and the guys in England found the one guy in the country who had 2 working models of that camera, brought him down to London with his cameras. He was one of the operators, and we actually found which CBS logo was on the sides of the cameras. I mean, it was just, I love that. Right. And the fact is, everybody else loved it too. And then we had a 360-degree set. And so when actors walk into a 360-degree set, something happened. Something happened to them. Everybody said that. It's like, you know, there's no other world visible in your frame of vision. Wherever you look, you're in Nixon's world. And it all took place in the Oval Office. So the idea was to be as claustrophobic as possible. You're trapped in this place with this guy. And just imagine a president who's full of burning resentments at not being respected by the people, the fancy people in New York, and you know, wants to get his revenge by using the powers of the presidency. I don't think that could ever happen again.
No, it's all right. Well, Harry, it's fascinating as always to talk to you. We look forward to hopefully seeing J. Edgar the movie. Or Here Comes J. Edgar.
Here Comes J. Edgar. Yeah.
And for God's sake, write your autobiography. Tell us all these more stories.
Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, Harry Shearer.
Thank you.
Good one.